Oh, welcome back to another episode of Ask Someone Else with myself, Kaz from Property by Kazi. As always, we have a special guest on every week, and this week is no different. We're going to be joined by Roland from Sanctum Homes, a property investor focusing on developments in London. He started investing in 2019 and since then has done developments in excess of 6 million GDV. There's a significant number of rooms under management, a lot of focuses on HMOs. Again, if you haven't been here before, we just talk all about property, and every week we have a conversation with somebody different. So join, see if you haven't already, make sure you add your friends. Let me know where you're watching from, where you're listening from today. How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, man. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm not too bad, thank you. Not too bad.
How's the sound? Is that okay?
Yeah, sound good. So,
Cool.
it's good to have you on. Just before I introduced you, but I'll introduce you again as people begin to join. So obviously this is the Ask Someone Else section. So the clue is in the title. You get an opportunity to ask people questions. It's great to use the comment box because it's easy for everybody to see. We can pin the questions there and everyone can get as much value as possible out of the questions. So feel free to ask. But Roland, how you doing? How's your weekend been?
You know what? I've had a good weekend. I've had a good Sunday because I've got two kids and they've been with my mum this weekend. So my wife and I have had a nice day. Went for a nice lunch. Went for a walk. So yeah, it's been good. It's been good. It's been very chilled. Not a normal Sunday.
That's nice. Little non-property weekend for you. So I think if we dive straight in, I saw obviously in what you sent over and looking at some of your socials, you started investing in 2019.
Yeah, I think that's right. Or was it late 2018? But yeah, around then. Started with HMOs and then more recently it's been conversions, houses into flats.
Okay.
So sort of moving from like investing, landlord portfolio mode into actually more mixing development with growing the portfolio.
Nice. And what were you doing before being in property? Like, where did you
Yeah, so my career started out of uni. I started in sort of management consultancy for a couple of years, and then I was really working in banking for about 10 years. So like a very kind of like financial corporate type background. And yeah, I just got pretty sick of it really. Combination of like the hours, the intensity of it, and the challenge of like sort of having a balance between that and your life and your family and stuff. And so when we started having kids, that was when it was sort of like this, the light switch kind of flipped, and it was like, hang on a minute, like this has been okay when I was young and I didn't have like those responsibilities, but actually, if you want to have more control over your own life and you want to be able to sort of be the kind of like father you want to be and sort of husband you want to be, then actually, you need to have that sort of control. And so it wasn't a case of like it has to be property, but it was a case of like, I want to work for myself and I want to be my own boss, basically.
Did you, before kind of finalizing on property, were there other options you were exploring when you were trying to transition into time?
My first out of my job, when I first quit my job, I was like, okay, I've got this business idea, and I did pursue that for about 18 months, I would say. Now the property stuff, the first HMO sort of slightly overlapped with that 18 months, but for the first at least 12 months or so, it was like pure focus on this other business idea. And I mean, without going into a lot of detail, it was like within sort of the health space, like a sort of a natural supplement type thing. Sounds super scammy when I say it right now, because like obviously supplements have got quite a dodgy reputation, but like it was something that I was very interested and passionate about. But what I realized is that like I didn't have the fundamental skill set to like execute on that business. The marketing and really kind of like the marketing and the digital advertising that was involved in that. And, there's obviously loads of businesses that have done incredible out of social media. and like, you know, using influencers and that sort of stuff. But I guess like, you know, I'm sort of like, so I'm 37, yeah, going on 38. Like I wouldn't say I'm sort of like social media native, you know, like Facebook kind of came out when I was like, you know, just out of uni. And then, you know, it's not sort of like as intuitive to me as it is to some people. So I was like starting that business, and I was but then I was looking at the other performers in that sector that were doing well, and I was kind of seeing what they had that I didn't have. And I could have put more money into it, and like, you know, because obviously like digital agencies that will kind of like do that sort of stuff. But I just kind of felt like I want to be doing a business where I feel like I'm kind of driving the value creation rather than just like trying to outsource that to somebody else. And yeah, I started doing, you know, the first HMO was something where I was like, it was really more of just kind of like, well, I've got a bit of money, so like, why don't I invest that? It wasn't kind of like meant to be the start of a business as such. Or like, it wasn't the idea at the time wasn't that would be my primary focus or activity, right? And so, but, you know, I just kind of like fell into it and really enjoyed it. And I think it's like the combination of, you know, it's the analytical side, which is obviously more my background, like the numbers and the spreadsheets and that kind of stuff. But it's also the creativity of, you know, floor plans and interior design and that kind of stuff, which I suppose like my whole career didn't really give me, and which I really enjoy as well. So yeah, it's been a bit of a journey and evolution, but, you know, I'm pretty happy the way it's worked out in the end.
But I think that's for a lot of people in business and transitioning from business into property or business into any other vocation. You have to look at what your skill set can deliver in the new business that you want to move into. And I think like the understanding perspective for a lot of people, you know, when wanting to move into property is also kind of actually understanding like what like key areas of my knowledge and my learning and my experience am I going to be able to take really effectively and move over to a new business.
Yeah, 100%.
That's important for a lot of people that want to get into property.
I always say to people, like, because property can be very broad. You know, there's, like I said, you know, there's like the numbers side of it. There's the relationship side of it, whether that's with your investors, with your tenants, with trying to source deals. There's the more sort of aesthetic side of it with your interiors and that sort of stuff. So there's lots of different things there, but you've got to at least love at least one of those things and like really feel like that's something where you are really good, right? Where you can really kind of like excel. And then the other things, you need to sort of at least be able to tolerate them, right? Like if you hate, because if you hate refurbs and dealing with builders and stuff, doing what we do, like if you really hate it, then you're not going to enjoy this, right? And if you're only focused on, but it'll make me financially free and it'll make me money and that sort of stuff, like it doesn't matter. Like you're not going to kind of, if you hate it that much, you're not going to make it anyway, generally, I think. So yeah, I agree with you. Like, you know, you've got to like find your, like, where's your angle? Where's your thing that you've got that you can apply to this business that's going to sort of make it, you know. Yeah.
I think in terms of, like you said, there's so many ways that you can be a good property developer. And I think you touched on some really important ones. Like you may have come from a sales background, and so your ability to build relationships is what is going to propel you to do really well, because a lot of property and buying and selling and business as a whole is a relationship business. If you come from a finance background and are great with numbers, your ability to analyze a deal is going to propel you and put you steps ahead of somebody who's not good at that. And some people are good at everything, and some people have got to work on, you know, a lot of things. But I think definitely trying to work out where your skills lie and then align them to an area of a business and focus on that. And then where possible, bring the right people in or the right skills around you to kind of pad everything else.
Yeah, completely. So what's your part of the chain of property that you feel that you're kind of like most got the strongest advantage in?
So like, I think it's a combination of the numbers and the relationships. So my educational background is economics. So like I'm a spreadsheet guy. Like I live in my spreadsheet.
I saw your story the other day on your spreadsheet, and I was like, "Oh, this fucker's spreadsheet's better than mine."
You know what's super funny?
It's got more tabs anyway.
Because I when I made that spreadsheet, or when I first ever posted about the spreadsheet, and I was thinking, like, because it takes a long time to explain, and I thought, this is the most boring story I've ever put out. Like my engagement is gonna go, whoop. But like people love the
People
spreadsheet.
love it, yeah.
They loved it, and I think like whether you're like if you're a property like expert and have been in it for ages, you'd appreciate the detail of like the ability that it allows you to analyze. And if you're a novice, the idea that you can find something that would maybe just straight away tell you what your return on capital is and be able to do your what if analysis if prices go up or if build costs go up, etc. It was really good, and I think definitely like a tool, whether or not it's a complicated spreadsheet, but having a process to be able to analyze deals or analyze opportunity in business as a whole can be a massive advantage.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like I'm a little bit traditional on this, where I think that I don't like the idea of someone just being given a spreadsheet and then just saying like, just use this. Like if you don't know how, it's a bit, look, if you can't build it yourself, then that's fine, but you need to understand how it works, because I feel like if you don't understand how it works, it's just like a black box, right? And you're just putting in numbers and it's giving you the answer. And, a lot of that stuff, like the what if analysis, a lot of it needs to be tailored for the specific deal, right? And you need to be able to kind of like understand how it works, and how to use it, and how to modify it, and that sort of stuff. And so, like, when I see people like, I'll download my spreadsheet or I'll sell you my spreadsheet, that kind of stuff, I'm just like, oh, I'm not sure how I feel about that, because they're just you can't simplify it down just to here's this like computer program where you put in the numbers and it tells you the answer, I feel. But I mean,
I think
like we said, like everyone's got their own skill set, right, and strength. So some people find the number side of it that's not where they're most comfortable, but they've got other parts where they're going to more than make up for that, right?
I think sometimes it's like the backbone, or it's a structure. But even if you've got structure, you still need the expertise to understand things. Because I could give you a spreadsheet, but if you've got no concept of how to cost the build cost, you're just throwing in numbers for the sake of it. And if even when it terms out looking at what are your finance costs going to be, like without the explanation of what you can and can't do with different types of finance at different rates of loans of value. And it's like as I tried to build it out as like a real tool, like that's how I ended up. I'm currently on like 9 tabs, and that's with it working for me. If I was to build it out and try and make it like a one-stop shop, I think I'd end up on like 50 tabs, and it'll be so complicated that you need a spreadsheet to explain the spreadsheet.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But no, that was cool. Anyway, I interrupted you. You were
that's what I was saying. So obviously, in terms of how you got started, so your first property, was that your first investment property, or did you have any buy-to-lets or anything else before that from a property?
No, that was the first. So the 8-bed HMO, the first one that I did, that was the first investment property that I've done. So it was interesting because I had some friends who, they'd started, buying their just straightforward buy-to-lets, like not even like a BRRR, just like, just buy a flat, new build or not new build, but like just buy a flat, tenant it. And yeah, I suppose I was always like, okay, well, they come, every few years they'd be like, oh, it's gone up in value a bit more and I've just refinanced it. And I suppose it goes back to what I said earlier, actually, like that just felt a bit too passive for me. Like I just felt like that's just purely a punt on the property price. Yeah. And this was mostly in London, right? So that was just purely a punt on London property prices, which, okay, historically, not so much quite recently, but historically have done quite well. But it didn't seem like, I don't know, I prefer sort of a type of investment where you feel like you are sort of forcing or adding value yourself rather than just putting some cash down and letting the market do the rest.
I guess that comes from your working background of working in.
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
Like you see returns and you see people trying to structure what they want to make from their money within a specific period of time.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, like my background was like mostly corporate finance. So I was working in M&A with oil and gas clients, and it was like a lot of like buying and selling assets and like raising money for projects, oil and gas projects and that sort of stuff. So it was a little bit more sort of like corporate than it was kind of like people investing. But I think that, what sort of like, you know, so I always felt with property that it was something that really interested me, but if I was going to get into it, I wanted to do it in a way where, you know, I was going to add value to it. And that's what I've done a couple of times. You know, I've done that with our own home that we bought, for example. So, you know, we bought a fixer upper house, did the extension, you know, did the interior renovation, that sort of stuff. And so, you know, HMO, when I sort of like found out a bit more about HMOs, I was like, okay, well, this is a great combination where, you know, I can go in and like buy a rundown house and I can do it up and add value to it, but I can also then continue to own it in a way that, you know, has good cash flow, rather than just, okay, you know, I'm clipping a bit of a yield which covers my costs and a little bit extra, but, you know, really it's about the capital growth, particularly in London, right? So yeah, that was kind of how I, you know, decided to sort of go on with that, and also just having a bit more time once I sort of got out of.
So, you know, when you first decided that you wanted to go like down the HMO route, was like actually before sort of pulling the trigger and going for that particular HMO, were you self-taught? Like, how did you go about like kind of your education in terms of wanting to do a HMO and being confident that you would be able to deliver that?
Yeah. So I did do some education actually. And I think it was helpful in the sense that, you know, I always look back on it in two ways. I think there's a bit of a, like, the education market has got such a challenging reputation at the moment because on the one hand, like, there's obviously like quite a lot of scammy people out there, and you know, they get sort of slammed, and rightly so. And then I think there's also like some companies that are, or some people that are probably actually okay, like they're not doing anything particularly bad, but there's a bit of a problem where, you know, like you go in and you don't know this stuff, and then you get taught it, and then once you know it, you're like, oh, well, that's not that complicated. Like, why did I spend all this money on this training? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's this joke about, like, you know, when you go to a restaurant and you're really hungry, and then you know, and then you're stuffed at the end, and the bill comes, and you're like, I don't want to pay for food. I've just eaten. So it's like, you know, it's a bit like the same thing with education. I think a lot of people, you know, when you're on from the outside, before you've received that education, it seems like super complicated. But then once you've had it, you're like, oh, okay, well, actually, it's not that difficult. So I think, I mean, I'm still don't really have, you know, people come to me and they say, like, do you think I should get education? Do you think I should get a mentor and that kind of stuff? Or do you think I should just kind of like, just look all the information up? Because all the information is kind of out there, right? I still haven't really got a clear answer to that. But in my case, yeah, I did some education, and, you know, I think it definitely kind of like got me going a little bit quicker. And I think the other thing is that, like, that sunk cost, the money side of it, of having actually put some money into that, I think, although it's a bit of a sort of mental psychological trick to, like, you know, then act on that sunk cost, I think it did like make me go, well, shit, like, I've already spent this money.
It created an element of accountability for you.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was just like, look, I don't want that money to be in for nothing, so I better crack on and actually do it, and do the first HMO. And so, yeah, that was kind of how that came about.
I think the education side is, yeah, it's like what you said about like a supplement or an alternative product. Like, there's a lot of good and bad education, and in terms of like, when me ask me, I think I'm very much like you. I'm super on the fence, because there's definitely value in it.
Yeah,
but definitely, and I think people really need to understand what it is they're paying for. So, you know, like you rightly said, the majority of the information out there isn't that complicated, but there is, and it is out there for free. But there's also a lot of misinformation and a lot of, you know, wrong information out there. So I think a lot of the time you're not paying for like a master hack into how to be great at property. You're paying for your journey to be streamlined. And if that's going to be a value to you, it really depends on your financial position at the time. Because if you've got really limited funds, it may be better to spend those funds on property, because you've only got a certain amount to spend. But if you've potentially got a little bit more disposable, and maybe you're a little bit more time poor, then you just kind of have to look at what assets you have to work with on day one, and how you can best maximize them to allow for your success. Yeah,
it's a really good point you make, actually, about, you know, there's all the information's out there, but the problem is there's also a load of other information which is a load of crap, right? So it's like, it's not so much telling you where the information is, it's telling you what information to ignore.
Yeah.
And because really what we're talking about is, like, you know, you want to be looking at like planning policy, HMO standards, like basically like dry documents on council websites.
Yeah, no,
Like
that's literally it. Like,
you want to basically ignore Facebook,
yeah.
and then you want to like figure out, okay, you've got these 3 or 4 different licensing and planning, and like how do these things like interact and that kind of stuff. So, you know, you could spend a lot of time online, sort of like going around in circles, and you just need someone to be like, look, it's not that complicated. Bang, bang, bang.
And some of those documents you mentioned are like 100 pages, for example, but there's the relevant parts to you are maybe 10 pages. So I think like when people talk about it to me, I kind of compare it to like put the personal shopping market. Like if, for example, you're saying you want this pair of trainers, now they are available. They're available out there, but you might have to queue up really early or get up somewhere or get in a queue or buy X, Y, or Z. But then if you're happy to pay the premium and have them to deliver to your door, you are going to overpay a little bit, but you're paying for the service as opposed to the exclusivity. And I think if you understand it like that, then it can, as long as the education's good, like, you know, it's providing you what you want, it can be beneficial sort of to everybody. So this first property then, this 8-bed, 8-bed's quite a lot of, you know, it's quite a good size HMO. It's not PD, it's full planning for your first HMO. Whereabouts was that? And talk to us about that and how that actually went as a first project.
Yeah, so that's in Thornton Heath, which I know you'll know where that is. So basically, so when I bought this house, I think the education I'd had sort of set my expectations on returns very low. And that's part of the reason why I'm a little bit negative on it in a way. But I bought that house to be a 6-bed HMO. And in the process of like, literally in the few months where I was like in the process of buying it, like the conveyancing period, which was probably about 3 or 4 months, like 2 things happened. One is I was looking at I was just looking at like the planning applications that have been put in on the street, which is now something that I would do like right at the start, right? Just to get a bit of an idea about that. But I was looking at the planning applications that are going on the street, and I realized that on the same style and shape and size of house, like a few doors down, not like too close, but a few doors down, someone had done a loft conversion and got 2 good sized rooms out of it. 2 rooms that in that local authority would be HMO, you know, would sort of fit the minimum standard. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I hadn't sort of like baked that into my, you know, analysis of the deal. And then the other thing that happened was that I was just starting to consume more, mostly podcasts, I would say, not so much Instagram at that stage, mostly a few different podcasts, and just kind of starting to get a bit of an idea of like what other people were doing, and like what sort of returns people might be expecting to make, and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, that was kind of like the flip where I was like, okay, so actually, you know, I could do it as a 6-bed, and it's more like a sort of a supercharged buy-to-let where I'll make slightly better returns than on a normal buy-to-let. Or I could do it as like an 8-bed, and then the revaluation is going to be a load higher. And obviously the rent will be a lot higher. And, you know, my return on investment once I've recycled that cash will be, you know, like an order of magnitude different, like completely different ball game, right? So I was like, okay, well, you know, I should probably look into this more. So then the next step was like, okay, well, you know, there's planning risk. Like if you're going to go from a C4 to an 8-bed, then you've got to get planning permission. So how do I, like, how much risk is involved with that? You know, will I get permission? So just went on the council website, like put in probably like in the search bar, probably just put in HMO into this is like the planning, just for the, I know you know, but for the audience, like the planning section of the website where you got all the search boxes, you can like search, you know, all the different things. Just put in the keyword or the description box HMO, and then or something like multiple, because you might want to search for like housing multiple occupations, so you might want to do both. And then, you know, just look through literally every single planning application for an HMO, and see, you know, how many of them are getting accepted. if they're being rejected. You tend to learn more, like I do this a lot now, particularly for like, converting houses to flats and stuff. Like you actually learn a lot more from the ones that rejected than from the approvals.
Yeah.
Because if it's approved, it's just like, yeah, it's all good, blah, blah, blah. Like it's a very short.
Because also, when it's approved, you don't know why, like you don't necessarily know why it's approved unless they had a load of objections where you can see that they met X, Y, or Z objection by doing A, B, and C.
Yeah,
you don't really get to learn that much because it's been accepted. But when it's been rejected, you can then see, okay, well,
you create, like when you go through all the rejections, then you create, okay, these are the things where you can fall down, right? These are the things you've got to satisfy, because you can read the local plan, but like it won't necessarily have every single bit of information you need, and it won't tell you the nuance of how they actually apply that wording to real life, right? So I went through. I'm going back a few years, but I do remember doing it now. Like spreadsheet, line by line, every single case, and just like building up a picture from that. And then by the end of that, I felt pretty confident that as long as we satisfied the various policies on the things that were important to the planners in that area at the time, then it would be accepted. And so the way that we actually did that one, and this was like a model that then, sort of did again and again a few times, was got the house, we converted it into an 8-bedroom HMO, but initially we didn't have that planning permission. So the first few months, we're just renting the first six rooms, we've got 2 empty rooms. And then as soon as like the permitted development, and this is before the Article 4, by the way. As soon as the permitted development kicks in, which is when you've got 3 people living there, now it's an HMO legally. So then we put in the planning application, and then 2 or 3 months after that, that's when we can start renting out room 7 and 8, and then that's when we can refinance it onto a onto a long-term product. Now, actually, with that one, because it was the first one, and I was kind of like doing things I wasn't as streamlined in the process as I subsequently became. On that one, my bridge expired whilst we were still in planning. So there was a couple of options there. One was to basically, and I was a first time borrower, right? Like one HMO, I didn't have a relationship with the bridger at this point.
Yeah.
So the options were basically like pay a penalty to the bridger, or refinance it onto a mortgage, like a long-term product, but one that didn't have an early repayment penalty. And so the numbers worked out slightly better to put it onto a mortgage. So it's a bit weird. Like we were on a bridge for 9 months, then it was put onto a mortgage as a 6-bed HMO without an early repayment penalty, and then literally that mortgage was there for like literally 3 or 4 months, and then it was put onto a long-term product. Now, had to do again. But it just shows that when you're doing your first one, like you're not going to do it perfectly, right? You're going to make mistakes, or you're going to do things a bit slowly or a bit not as streamlined, as I said. And so, that was a bit of a pain, but there's usually a solution to these things.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what? So you managed to get a commercial valuation for that one. So you got like the uplift, because I think now what a lot of people are struggling with is they have these HMOs, but they're just standard C4, so they're 6 rooms or less, and although they're cash flowing really well, they're still getting a bricks and mortar valuation, which means that they struggle to pull out as much money. And it's that kind of element of taking sometimes that bit more of a risk, or investing a little bit more to make them that bit bigger, which means you can actually pull out a lot more of your money. What were the numbers like on this first one?
So I think the house cost, so I definitely overpaid on the house. Know that now. The house cost about 450. The refurb was probably about 100 and like all in maybe like 160 or something like that. So it's like four ensuite bedrooms, and then 4 other bedrooms, 2 further bathrooms. So rear extension, loft conversion. And it got revalued at 800, which I think, compared to our other 8-bed HMOs in that area, was probably that was actually the low end. So the others were all higher than that. So that came out after the cash out. That turned out to be like what was it? 30. I think it was like 35% ROI or something like that. So that was pretty good. And so I looked at the numbers at the end of it, and I was like, okay, well, you know, that's really good compared to other things that I could do potentially. But at the same time, I know that I can do it better next time. I can definitely avoid all that, the money that got pissed away from like putting it onto a mortgage for 3 months and then remortgaging it again. I know that I can, like knowing the market better than I did at the time, I know that I can definitely source houses cheaper than that. To be honest, the refurbs didn't really get much cheaper. That pretty much stayed the same. But yeah, I think just to go back to your point about, you know, with the commercial mortgages, yeah, that was kind of like, I should have mentioned that. That was the other thing when I was looking at, okay, I can get 2 bedrooms in a loft and I can get more rent from that. The other point, as you say, was, you know, and I can therefore get a much higher revaluation on it. Because as a 6 bed, because I know this for a fact because of that weird refinancing as a C4 before it had the planning permission, that was valued at 600. So, you know, the extra 2 room, it was, you know, basically on that particular one, it turned out to be exactly basically like 100,000 per room. Like as a 6 bed, it was 600. As an 8 bed, it was 800.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's the same house, had the same amount of money spent on it. You know, basically that valuation at 600 didn't put any value on the loft conversion because those 2 rooms couldn't be rented. But like, if you think about, you know, that loft conversion maybe cost like 40k, and it added 200k to the value of the house.
Yeah,
so it's like, it's these things where you look at like, okay, so there's some stuff that you do in these refurbs, like you do it because you have to do it, and it's not necessarily going to add a lot of value. And then you've got these certain things, you know, generally adding floor space, where like the return on your money is just, you know, it's crazy, and that's what sort of makes the money.
And that's what it is, I think. And that also because of where you transition to and why you see a lot of people, for a number of reasons, move from HMOs to flat conversions, is because as a starting point, it worked. Like, it wasn't your ideal product. It didn't have the same, you know, you described it as like a supercharged buy-to-let. It didn't have the same allure as the 8 bed. But if worst case scenario, you didn't get your planning, you had like a stepped return. And then also you then get the added benefit of you spend a little bit more and you make a lot more. Because even if you didn't hit, you know, that, let's say your valuation didn't even go up that much more, but you spent £40,000 and those 2 rooms brought in an extra £1,500 a month. Even outside of the valuation, your return on investment on that £40,000 is still, you know, you're still looking at close to what, sort of 40% over the year. So they're still really good ways of making additional money. And then when you take that same ethos and transfer it to the flat conversions, you then have that same thing where you're like, okay, worst case scenario, we'll get, you know, maybe this many units, but for not much more spend than we get these many units, you know, your return on investments, you know, it sort of skyrockets. So, so you did, how many HMOs did you do after that first one?
So I did, 4 more. So I got, 5 HMOs. And then the transition to the flat conversions was actually, again, a little bit accidental. So the 6th house that I bought was, when I went to view it and I was analysing it and decided to offer, it was going to be another HMO. It was going to be like the 6th HMO. And I suppose I started to, again, you know, it's that conveyancing period where you sort of like, you start to think about what you're going to do. I had the HMO case was solid and that would be fine. But what I realised at that point was that by being in the mindset of like a landlord growing the portfolio, like ultimately I was going to start to constrain, I was going to become capital constrained. You know, I started off with a pot of money and I got some really good revaluations and pulled out a lot of money. Like one of the HMOs was all money out. Another one was like, you know, the other 2 were like pretty small chunks compared to the first one, pretty small chunks of money left in. But nevertheless, like overall, over the 5 HMOs, like, you know, bits get left in each time and the pot's getting smaller and smaller. And so I was looking at the 6th one and I was like, you know, that pot is it's not getting bigger. It's not getting bigger, right?
Yeah.
It's either getting smaller, or in the best case, you get all your money out and it's basically staying the same. And so, you know, I looked at it as I don't want to get into a position where, you know, I'm constrict. Like, I always want to be constricted by my capacity and appetite to have deals on the go at one time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be constricted by money. And so that's when I sort of flipped into thinking, okay, well, you know, actually probably a lot of people should have, you know, a flipping strategy as well as a investment, you know, long-term hold strategy, and those two should sort of work together side by side. And so, yeah, so that house then turn it into 2 3-bed flats. Managed to get it at a decent price. Usually, as you'll definitely know, like, you know, splitting something into 2 is you know, pretty borderline. But it didn't, like, the configuration just wouldn't work for 3 flats. So yeah, we had to go for 2 3-beds, but they were like good size. You know, did them up to a really nice standard. It was in Collier's Wood, so it's in an area where, like, you know, there's demand for like nice stock. And yeah, that went really well. And so yeah, that's kind of the plan now, is to you know, have that combination of you know, reinvesting in the portfolio, but also to, you know, to sell stuff as well, because I think that, like, you know, there's a lot of, particularly, I mean, you know, I suppose my exposure to what property people are talking about, a lot of it is based on social media, but you know, there's a lot of focus on this BRRR strategy, and I understand why, in the sense of, like, the sort of the magic of, you know, using the same pot of cash over and over again, and the recycling. And it's like, when you don't know about that, and there was a time that I didn't know about that, like, when you first find out about it, you're like, that's amazing. Like, you know, you know, rather than just like saving up for a deposit and then buying a flat and then that's it, like, you can actually kind of like keep going. Yeah. But, you know, if you're going to do this full time, then, you know, just doing it one after the other is going to slow you down a lot, right? And so I think that rather than wanting to sort of hoard everything and keep everything that you develop, you know, there's a lot of mileage in sort of, you know, having an open mind. You know, if you sell a few things, particularly early on, you expand your cash pot, you know, your ability to do a lot, you know, it just supercharges your growth, rather than just kind of like trying to kind of eke out as much as you can from this little from the original cash pot.
And I think that's something that I think is quite refreshing to hear, because I personally hear it a lot, and I think because there's a lot of talk in the space about BRR is very topical and it's very clickbaity, and everybody talks about it because it sounds amazing. I bought this, you know, the clickbait side of it is, I bought this house for £250,000 for only £5,000, for example.
It's a free house. It's a free house. Yeah.
Which is great, but then for me, it's a case of that's good in isolation. But like you said, it's where do you want to go with property? And if your personal goal is to just build up maybe a portfolio to the point that it substitutes an income, but then that's it, then potentially it could work really well for you. But if you really want to grow and excel and have that exponential growth, and, you know, you're looking at doing bigger and better things, your capital, as you mentioned, is going to be what's going to restrict you from doing that. So having like a multifaceted strategy is always going to be really helpful. I think also when it to conversions, because conversions, I think you can very easily become attached to, because the idea of keeping this building of flats that are all yours sounds great. But then you spoke about Collier's Wood, you know, 3-bedroom flat over there is expensive. It's sort of, you know, it's going to be, I don't know the area exactly right now, but it's just going to be sort of, what, 450,000?
Yeah, so those two sold for 500. So it's like, okay, look, I can keep them, but I'm going to put them on a 75% mortgage, but then I'll have 250 grand tied up in it, right? And this is the bit which people, and when they talk about they get all their money out, it's like you never get your money out, right? You get, because you've got a 75% mortgage, so 25% of the value is tied up. Like, you know, the money that you invested has come back out, but you've created a lot of equity value. And the question is, what are you going to do with it? Do you want that to stay in that property, or do you want to get it back out and then go on and do what I would think bigger and better things? Because, you know, I can either leave that 250 in that development and, you know, it'll get a bit of yield and it'll grow with property prices, or I can put it into the next project and then, you know, double or triple it again, you know, in 12 months. So, you know, I agree with you. Like the BRRR thing is great if you want to do, particularly if you're running it with your full-time job and you want to just have like one project on the go at a time, and you go from one project and you recycle it to the next project. That's perfectly.
But also in an ideal world, like you said, you're going to have a diminishing like even in an ideal world, always getting 100% of your money out, particularly if you're operating, you know, in London, you're going to have a diminishing cash pot. So you're going to be recycling your money, yes, but you're going to be doing smaller and smaller things. And don't get me wrong, there's the other side of it that over a longer term, you know, property prices are rising. And, you know, that's been the trend, you know, for as long as I've been alive. That's been the trend. Whether or not there's been little dips and troughs in that process, they've been rising. But again, it's the time and how long do you want to take to increase your cash pot again. You know, with the constraints on buy-to-let mortgages, a lot of the products that mean you can get that 75% LTV mean you're in a 5-year tie-in, which may mean that, you know, you can't get money out without significant redemption penalties for another 5 years. And I think you have to look at what exactly you want to do at any given point in time. And there's a phrase that we often talk about, depending on what you know, position in your personal life cycle you are at. Because if you're looking at it from a, like, you know, I just want to look after my money, like I want to make my money work harder than inflation, then, you know, that BRR strategy might work really well for you because you're trying to preserve your wealth. But if you're trying to grow your wealth, then you need that same example of £250,000 left in those 2 flats in Collier's Wood that are, even if they're working well for you and making £1,000, you know, a month, like profit, that's 12,000 a year. That's a 4% return on investment. You know, you're just really fighting inflation at that point. And it's still a good income. Like, you know, if that's what you want to do, you're just protecting your money, but it's not that attractive growth strategy that, you know, a lot of us really got into property for, which is that £250,000 that you can actually pull out to go and do something else.
And this is like, I think I DM'd you about this in response to one of your posts a few months ago, but basically, like, I think that there's too much the side piece of this focus on BRRR is actually just like a more macro thing, which is like, there's a little bit too much focus on property investing. Like investing, if you strip it all back, is really, as you say, it's about, okay, I've got money. What am I going to do with that money? Mm-hmm. And so it's more of a sort of later stage in life thing, maybe, where you're kind of like, okay, I want to preserve this money, or I want to grow it, or I want to be able to pass it on and that sort of stuff. But like in your sort of prime productive years, like you don't want to have too much capital tied up in a pretty safe, but not necessarily the fastest growing like asset class, right? Like property is, you know, there's a lot of focus on it, and it's something that we all understand. We all know what it is because we all have to live in one. But like, it's not necessarily, as you say, like, you know, the return, if I kept those flats, the returns on that wouldn't be, well, it all comes down to the capital appreciation. Like the yield is obviously just rubbish. So, I think that, you know, people starting out, people that are, you know, that are sort of young or youngish, then like nothing wrong with investing and like building a portfolio, but like complementing it with something else.
Like complementing it with the work. And that's the other thing about property, that it's as passive as you want it to be, but your returns are often linked to your actions and like your activity. Like if you don't want to be out there looking for your next deal like on a regular basis, because deals come on every day, and if you're missing some of those days, then because you're taking time off, you're only looking once a month or once every now and again, that's super passive. But then you're also going to miss out on 99% of the deals and 99% of the opportunities. So what's next for you in terms of conversions? Have you got anything in the pipeline, or do you know stuff that you'd want to do?
Got some things in the pipeline, things that are being negotiated or things that are under offer that we're buying. At the moment it's look, I'm quite I quite like sort of like not going too fast. I think that like which sounds a bit dumb because like my first thing was an 8-bed HMO. A lot of people are like how can you do that as your first deal? And that was maybe a little bit risky, but I think that like generally speaking, dogs trying to jump up. Generally speaking, you know, I do sort of subscribe to kind of like, you know, it's a marathon, not a sprint type thing, and like all the cliches, like you never want your next deal to be your last deal and all that kind of thing, right? Like,
Well,
you know,
I love a cliche or a saying. I love a saying.
but it's like, but you know, these lot of things they're said because they're true. You know, like the thing about not wanting your next deal to be your last deal. Like, don't try and like don't blow your brains out trying to be a hero with like this huge deal that you're maybe unprepared for, don't have like the experience or the expertise of how to do it. And it's fine. You're never going to know when you do something for the first time. You're never going to know about how to do it exactly. But you know, there's ways of mitigating that risk. And so, moving into conversions, like the first 2 that I've done have just been pretty simple, right? Convert a house into 2 flats. A lot of people would look at that, particularly people that have been doing this for a few years, and be like, you know, why do you even bother? But you know, they were good enough deals, particularly on the sourcing side, getting them cheap enough, the sale values being high enough with, you know, going the extra mile on the interiors without spending too much money, but just like adding that extra kind of sauce to it. And then the other thing is, you know, like just learning the basics of that, because, you know, it's kind of like it's a little bit more complex than the HMOs. There's a little bit more stuff you need to be thinking about. In terms of your utilities and your soundproofing and a few other things. So just kind of, you know, cutting your teeth on a new thing in a way that you're not putting crazy amounts of capital at risk. But, you know, having done those and like knowing how that works now, I think, you know, the next ones that I'm looking at is more like, you know, bigger properties, 4, 5, 6 flats, that sort of thing.
Nice.
Yeah, and then maybe at some point it'll be, you know, bigger things again. But like, I'm not sort of like, I don't have the sort of, you know, I don't have this sort of like, there's no ego about it. Like, it's not like, oh, I have to go and
do a new build.
I have to do new builds. But if I don't do new builds, I'm not a proper property developer, you know.
No, that's fair enough. I think a lot of the stuff you said, like, and it sounds, you know, when you say it in passing, like little things like, yeah, you have to think about your sound testing. But like sound testing is something that bites a lot of people when they do their first conversion, because it's something they've never had to think about before, or your new build warranties and all sorts of things that you learn about. And if you're not paying that attention to detail and you just take it as, oh, it's just another refurb, like they can bite you massively at the end of a project. So I think that's a lot of really good advice in terms of just, you know, managing risk and reward and managing, you know, that. Also, when you spoke about one thing that I think you said that I think I really liked was that you did projects that maybe other people wouldn't have done. They say, oh, what's the point? But it doesn't matter what the point is to somebody else. It matters what the point is to you. Like, and if that return works for you, it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing, whether it's on Instagram or real life or wherever the case may be.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of comparison stuff going on, right? Particularly with social media. Like, we have we think we have such a window into what other people are doing. But the reality is often, and I had a conversation yesterday with someone where, it was just another reminder where like the reality is a lot different to what you're seeing on social media. So I just think that there's quite a lot of value in just kind of doing a simple deal to start off with, where it might not make you as much money as like something else you could theoretically do, but again, it's all about that risk-weighted return. And if you're not, if you haven't done this before, then there's risk that attached to that. And if you want to do something, if you start with something smaller where you can kind of minimize that risk potentially, and treat that as part of your education, right? Yeah. Like, if you can do it, if your first deal doesn't lose you money, that's free education.
Exactly. Cheapest education. And you might have made a little bit of money and you've made some relationships and you've done a lot along the line that you wouldn't have got, elsewhere from doing nothing, or for doing something high risk that could have lost you money. My final question, as we're running out of time, is, Roland, this is a very regular phrase that I hear at the moment, particularly in London. There's no deals available at the moment. What would you say in response to that?
So it's funny because I'm not like doing such a volume of deals, that the last time that I had bought something prior to going out and picking something up last week. The last time I actually bought something was like first half of last year. And so, yeah, I hadn't actually really been like deeply in the market for a period of time. And I'd been hearing that a lot. And then sort of start of the year, I finished that project. Those flats were going on the market. And actually, that's a good example. I was basically capital constrained. I was waiting to get that project finished, knowing that they'd soon be on the market so I could sell them, so I could get money back in, so I could go again, which is not a position I want to be in. But so I went back into the market, start of the year, started looking at stuff. And yeah, there was like, I mean, I find that there are deals out there. But I think that it just depends what people mean by a deal, right? I think if you want a straightforward flip without any planning risk or without any planning element to it, I imagine that's probably pretty tough. But I mean, I think that's been the case for quite a long time, probably. I think that, you know, if you know what it's like, it's all about, you know, being able to sort of, you know, wring as much value out of the property as you can, and knowing, you know, having a good idea of kind of, you know, within the planning structure and what the planners are looking at, like, okay, this is the ambitious case we could get to, and this is kind of the mid case, and, you know, having all your different scenarios. But I just think that, like, you know, because sometimes, you know, you speak to agents and they're showing you a house, and they're, yes, big old house, and they're like, yeah, I reckon you could get 3 flats out of this, and you're just thinking, like, I know I can get more out of this, like, you know. It's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, you know, with the minimum size standards, and, you know, you've got to have your bedrooms, they've all got to have windows. Like, it's you know, it's not like, it's not easy, and you have to spend sometimes quite a bit of time, you know, looking at a floor plan to figure out what you can afford to pay for it, and what's, you know, and to actually do that's probably where I spend the most time when I'm analysing a property. You know, I might, you know, I'll initially do it.
Like me, you get super upset with a property that doesn't have a floor plan. It can look great. You're like, look at it, like,
well, I don't even bother. I don't even bother. If it doesn't have a floor plan, I don't even bother because, like, I don't want to. I try and minimise the amount of actual viewings that I do, because my view is, like, there's so much information on the internet that, like, by the time what I tend to do is, like, I'll pick up the phone, and if it looks interesting, I'll pick up the phone and just check it's actually still on the market. Because the worst thing you can do is spend an hour on it and be like, oh yeah,
you've done comps, you've had
you know, and then these pricks haven't updated Rightmove because they still want to build up their backup list. And it's then like, oh, I'm sorry, sir, that's been under offer, and we're about to exchange on it. And it's like, oh my god. So, like, if it looks interesting, then I pick up the phone. Okay, is it still on the market? Yes, it is. Okay, I'm going to do a bit of work on it, and if I still think it's interesting, then I'll call you back for a viewing. Then I'll sort of, you know, start looking at it properly, check if there's any planning history on the house, check if there's any planning history on the places nearby, you know, good look around on Street View, Google Earth, look at the floor plan, you know, look at the neighbours, what sort of extensions could I do that won't, you know, that could get approval, that won't sort of, like, you know, well, that fit the local policies.
Not overdeveloping.
You know, what do I think? How many flats would this be? Are they 1 beds, 2 beds, 3 beds? And then that goes in the spreadsheet, and then it's like, and that's all being done before the viewing, right? And then it's like, okay, well, I think this could work, and it's either going to work at, and then it's like, okay, at what price does this work? Well, you know, if that's within 10% of the asking price, then I'll probably give it a call, give it a viewing. If it's less than 10, if it's got to have a bigger discount on it, then it's like, well, is it worth it? Well, depends. Like, if it's been on the market for quite a long time, if it's recently been reduced, then yes, there's definitely, like, you know, maybe a bit of urgency there. If it's just gone on the market in the last week, like, nobody's accepting 15% discount in the first week, right? So, you know, there's a bit of that sort of thing. And and, like, sometimes, you spend a lot of money, like, you've got to kiss a lot of frogs, like, you spend a lot of time looking at stuff that isn't going to work, and it's a waste, it's a quote unquote waste of time. But what I like about it is, like, actually you learn a lot when you're doing all that stuff, and you just get quicker and quicker at doing it, and you can bash out these floor plans so fast, and it's like, it becomes more efficient. But, you know, so long answer to an easy question, yes, there are deals, but you know, they're not everywhere. But I think if you're doing this full time and you spend a month looking for, you know, a decent deal, you'll find one on Rightmove for sure.
I think for someone that's looking for deals, that was a lot of really good advice, like put quite succinctly, in terms of, you know, you've got to know what you're looking for in the first place. Like, I think that you know, key advice of actually check that what you're looking at is still available is a massive time saver.
Yeah,
can avoid
I've learned that the hard way.
that can demotivate you. Then doing your comparables, actually working out realistically what your end value is going to look like, so you know what you can pay for it. And because I like a saying, I'm going to go with the final thing that you've got to kiss a lot of frogs. You're going to have to look at a lot that may not be great. You're going to have to look at a lot that may not work, that works maybe on paper, and then when you did a practical viewing, you saw that for whatever reason, you know, that where you thought you could have put a loft, you look and you see the ridge height as nowhere near enough for that loft conversion. It just isn't.
Man. That's my first thing, right? Walk into a house and the estate agent's like, would you like to see the sitting room? I'm like, no, I'd like to get in the loft. That's like, because if the loft doesn't work, I don't care about your sitting room.
It is. It's funny because like a lot of the stuff you say really resonates really well.
Because we're doing the same thing in the same area.
Through my process of, okay, like, do I know the area? I know what I can roughly get here. You know what you can roughly pay. You work it backwards. But I definitely think, yeah, today's been a really sort of just honest, genuine conversation about what it takes to do the type of deals that you're currently doing. And I think it's been really good advice for anybody that maybe, you know, wants to get into HMOs, has an idea of wanting to maybe get into conversions in the long term, but then is going to pivot into doing the conversions in the future, because I think HMOs are a really good prep for getting into those conversions because of that element of risk mitigation to, okay, worst case scenario, I get 6 rooms, great case scenario, you know, best case, I get 8. Same with the flats, like, okay, worst case scenario, I get 2, and this is my return on capital employed for these 2. And if I get the third one, it's like a bonus, and if I get the fourth one, it's sensational. But you can step back and sort of stagger that risk and reward accordingly. So we appreciate you having you on, Roland. For those that haven't already, make sure you go and check him out.
Thanks very much for having me, man. It was good to talk to you.
No, good to talk to you too. Thank you. We'll be back this time next week. Take care, everyone. See ya.